Good morning.
Good morning, and welcome to Cancer Book Club for the month of April in 2019. And I'm really pleased today to introduce our guest, Liz O'Riordan, who has written, along with a co-author, as I understand, her book, The Complete Guide to Breast Cancer. Liz has a remarkable story, being both a breast cancer surgeon as well as a survivor herself. So with no further ado, welcome, Liz.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on here.
Let's dive in with some questions. Your book is just wonderful for anybody going through breast cancer. This is one of those books you have to have. It not only walks you through everything in detail, but you pay attention to the emotional aspect of the experience, which is everything in so many ways.
It really is.
You know, no one's lucky to have cancer ever, but given that it's happened, has cancer changed the way you see life? I know it's had huge changes for me, and it's something I always wonder about for everybody.
It's changed my life completely. I've discovered an inner strength I never knew I had, and a different way of helping people. And it's just made me realize what is really important to me. Before cancer, I'd spent 20 years training to be a breast surgeon, and my life was basically work, eat, sleep, repeat. And I had no time for hobbies. It was all exams and papers. And suddenly, having 18 months off at home, you realize how isolating and unbalanced my life was. And my life is so much richer because I've had time to actually do what I used to love.
What are some of the things you used to love that you're doing now?
So gardening and drawing and actually getting out on my bike and having time to go and meet people for coffee. And it's just, I'm more fulfilled, and I'm actually more fulfilled helping people through blogging and writing and talking than I ever was as a surgeon.
Yeah.
Blogging is interesting, isn't it? You know, I was going through, we redid our site recently and some things didn't move over. And I came across an old post and reposted it. And one of the comments I made was that the things that we write in our blogs may actually outlive us. Isn't it interesting to think that our electronic lives have this longevity?
It is. And I think when you first enter the cancer space, you can forget that, and you can be quite emotional or angry. And actually it's there, it's permanent. And I was always very aware as a doctor and a patient just to try and not be too emotional, or what's the word, to exaggerate, and just to be honest and true, because it is permanent, and I think it will outlast us. And that's actually quite exciting, that you can leave a legacy for anybody to read.
I find it just fascinating and exciting, and you can reach so many people now
Exactly.
through social media. It's incredible.
I just want to, I'm a clinical psychologist in my day job when I'm not a cancer patient. And in my view, if you feel angry and you want to, you put that out there on the media, there's 100,000 people who also feel that way, who want to see their feelings reflected and echoed, because anger and distress are part of it. And so in a way, I don't think anybody has to apologize for having strong feelings about cancer.
No, I guess because I was initially treating as a doctor and a patient, I've now retired. If patients come to me having read what I've put on social media, I am treating with two very different persona.
Yes.
But I'm very aware that it's easy to come across as a superwoman. I do this, I do that. And actually, you need to let people in and show them the pain and the anger and the dark days to know that everybody goes through it. And that is so important, as you said, Robin.
You know, it's so interesting. When I was trying to find my voice for Cancer Road Trip, I started off never writing about cancer. And a number of people said to me, why don't you write more about cancer? And it's taken me a little while to really become more comfortable with that. But it's a critical piece of the story. And everybody shares, I think, a lot of very common feelings and emotions about the whole thing.
Yes.
Has cancer changed the way you approach your patients?
It did. It was really, really hard. Initially, I was very aware of the language I was using. Until you've had bad news broken to you, you have no idea what it's like. And I was good at doing it, but little things. So I've seen the whole spectrum of breast cancer, from a 90-year-old who have a tablet to the 20-year-old who's pregnant with terminal disease. And most women, it's not a big thing. They don't need chemo. And I would say, it's lucky we caught it early. And when it's you, you suddenly realize that no one's lucky to have cancer. And it's made me very aware of what I used to say. But going back, it was hard because I wanted to be their friend. And you want to share that commonality of, I've been there, I know what it's like, I can help. But I can't, because that patient has to go through their journey themselves. And when they're ready to hear about other people, they will then let you know. And that was a really hard ethical tightrope to walk.
I think that's one of the things that drives me a little crazy about the cancer experience. It just repeats again and again and again, and it's heartbreaking every single time. And what can you do to break that cycle? I don't know that you can.
I don't think you can. I mean, I've seen women react to being told they need a mastectomy to getting their phones out and saying, right, next Tuesday suits me. I've seen other women run out the room screaming and come back 2 hours later. It's an incredibly individual experience. And I think it's a bit like grief. You have to go through those 5 stages, the anger, the guilt, the denial, the betrayal, until you get to acceptance. And it's accepting we all go through those emotions, but in very different times. And that's okay.
Has cancer also changed the way you see your profession?
No, I knew the NHS did a fantastic job at looking after cancer patients, and I had fantastic care. And I think it made me realize how hard it is to treat doctors who are patients.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of training, and it's very easy to either forget what you'd normally say, to ignore them, to assume they know what's going on. And you have to treat us like patients. And it's very, very hard. And I had junior doctors who were scared of treating me because I'm a consultant surgeon. And when you see a colleague in a patient role in the hospital, you want to go and say, hi, what are you here for? But actually, they're not your friend or a colleague, they're a patient. And you just nod and walk past because you're almost breaching their confidentiality. And it's really hard. And because hospitals are mainly full of female staff and nurses, I treat a lot of colleagues. And it's really hard just to treat them like a normal patient and pretend that you know what they know. Does that make sense?
It
You know,
does.
that's perfect sense to me. I live in a small community and we've had many of the same experiences and the same dilemmas around that when you are in the room of your friend
Yeah.
who you're on a first name basis with for 30 years, and suddenly it's like you just have to kind of
Yeah.
take what they're saying to you when you're the patient, and then the reverse where I'm the clinician and they're the patient. That's
Yeah.
just like a totally, oh yeah, you really
It's
have to
hard. And
put on the
I
hat.
felt you have to have dealt with your own cancer to be able to treat other people. And I found that really hard. When I was having a bad day, I couldn't be completely unbiased to give my patients what they needed. And it's learning to cover up your feelings. And then when do you let them out? Yeah, it was really hard.
Yeah, no, there's an attunement thing with the patient that's really critical there. But when I was treating as a psychologist, so I had in therapy several people coming to see me for cancer-related sort of struggles, like going back to work and so on. And then I had a recurrence while I was treating them, and I had to say, "I'm sorry, I can't treat you anymore. I have to transfer you because I've had a recurrence of my cancer."
Yeah.
And they lost their minds. They cried. They were like beside themselves, saying, I'm really, really sad, and I'm really, really scared, because I was recurred after 7 years remission. So people were like, oh, it's safe to go see this person. She's not going to get cancer and die in the middle of the
And then if
treatment.
it happens to you, it could happen to them. And
Yes, of course, exactly. And that's exactly how they relate. I ended up frightening my own patients through my recurrence, but you had to be very stoical and kind of model, yes, I've
Yeah.
recurred, so now I have to go to treatment, and this is how I'm going to do that responsibly, and so forth. And it was very, you had to breach that wall to say, I'm sorry, this
Yeah.
is me, my personal thing now is going to derail our thing. Anyway, I had patients, like you say, some people ran out of the room screaming, and other people who were like, kissed my hand kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, it's a bit loud, but I love you.
We've all been through this experience of recurrence. What do you think is the hardest part of it?
I think for me, my stats weren't great. I knew I had a high chance of it coming back based on the size and my age. And there's a friend of mine said he had melanoma, and he said he was glad the day it came back because he could stop waiting for it to happen and start dealing with it.
Hmm.
and I got it. And I told my mum and she said, "You're crazy." But when I got my local recurrence, it was a relief, but it was actually terrifying because I wasn't expecting it. I'm a surgeon. I didn't think it was a recurrence. My own surgeon didn't. And it's like, I've missed that. And for me, I'm never going to trust another scan again, but I'm a surgeon, so I see my patients, and mine was missed. And it's just this weird, I think a local recurrence, you're caught in a strange hinterland of it's not proper stage 4 Mets. So you can't get the good drugs, but you kind of don't know where you belong.
Yes,
Now,
I'm in
you know,
exactly
it's
that.
very
I'm
interesting.
in exactly that situation right now.
Yeah, I live in that situation. And people don't know how to handle you or what to do. And so I tend to, what do I tend to do? I tend to not say much about it. If it's relevant, I tell a very short story, 3
Yeah,
sentences, and we move on.
yeah. It's not a big thing, and hopefully it never will be, but it does just make you more aware that life is potentially shorter than you thought it was.
And, you know, therefore, like you were saying when we first started off, potentially richer. I have a
Yeah,
quote from you. It says, you said, "The day I told Twitter I had cancer was one of the best days of my life." And
yes,
you and your co-author actually met through social media. So
we did.
let's talk about social media and cancer, because I personally think social media is terrific when it comes to cancer.
It has changed so much in the last 3 years. So when I was diagnosed back in 2015, I mainly tweeted about triathlons and baking and bread. And I thought, I can't not talk about my cancer on Twitter for 9 months. And because I was being treated in a hospital where I'd worked, people would recognize me walking around with bald heads. So I thought, right, I'm going to tell people. But I had to have my husband on board because it would affect both of us. And he said yes. So we both pressed the button at the same time to send the tweet. And within hours, I was flooded with messages of support from people all over the world who I'd never met. And that continued because I didn't meet another breast cancer patient during my treatment. So it was incredibly socially isolating. And I got support through patients on Twitter. They told me how to cope with chemo. They told me what to do. I found a couple of doctors with cancer, one of whom was Trish Greenhouse, I wrote the book with. And we shared how we coped being a doctor with cancer. And it's why I've written the book. It's why I've talked. It has changed my life. But it's changed so much now. There are so many bloggers and influencers and talkers, and it's fantastic. It's becoming normal to talk about it.
Yeah, I think getting rid of that stigma is really important. And some of the stigmas continue, particularly with lung cancer, but at least people now are talking about things. And I think that's
Yeah,
just critical.
definitely.
So what advice would you give somebody vis-a-vis social media and cancer?
I think it's an amazing place to get support of people who are going through what you're going through at the same time. It's an amazing place to get information about what I love about Twitter is I can ask a professor of oncology at the Memorial Sloan Kettering about a trial and they'll reply and they'll tell me. You can ask anybody anything. And I think it's opened things up. Patients are they're in control of their illnesses, their bodies. They often know more than their doctors. And it's a great way of just getting some control back when cancer feels it's taking everything from you. But there's a lot of scary stuff out there. There are a lot of dangerous blogs. There are a lot of people peddling snake oils. And I think it's hard to find your way through. And I think a safe place to start is actually looking at the forums. So breastcancer.org in the States, in the UK, we have Breast Cancer Care, where you can dip your toe in the online community and just see, is this for you? Do you want to share?
Yeah, I remember when I was going through one of my reoccurrences, I have lymphoma. Well, I remember a series came out and they had all these very alternative things that were going to, of course, cure your cancer.
Yeah,
And I became very angry over it because having walked in those shoes and knowing how terrified you are and how much you don't want to have cancer and how much you want to be well, for
yeah,
somebody to try to dangle this false hope in front of you and maybe lead you down the wrong path
I know.
infuriated me, just infuriated me.
But I mean, we cover diet and vitamins in our book, but I get why people do it. They just want control.
Yeah.
As a doctor, I cannot cure recurrent breast cancer. But if some guy in Mexico says a vitamin C enema has cured one person, then you could be the second. And I get that. what we wanted to do was help people understand the evidence behind what they're doing and actually make a sensible decision. But it's really hard. And I think you may be against it, but your family may say, oh, can you do that for me? Because it might work.
Yeah.
It's not just what you want, it's everyone else around you.
What do you think
It's
about,
so hard.
yeah, what do you think about some of the neuroscience that's coming up about mind-body connection?
I think, I can't prove this, but I do think stress has a huge negative impact on people recovering from any illness, whether it's mental or physical. And anecdotally, I would see a lot of women who would come back with recurrence, having either been divorced or moving house or changing job, major life stresses. And I think women especially are very good at juggling a million balls in the air. And the thing that gives is our body. And I used to tell my patients, this is now a chance to look after yourself and take time out for you and just try and recenter yourself, because no one else is going to do it. And I think there's a huge thing to be explored there. But I don't want people to think it's their fault they got cancer because they were stressed, because that's not true. And it can often go down that path and make you feel guilty.
No,
You
that's
got divorced,
and
you
if-
got cancer. Yeah,
What I say to people, if stress caused cancer, everyone would have it.
exactly.
So if there's maybe some, what they call diathesis stress. If you're vulnerable, the stress is going to impact you differently than it might impact the person next to you. But we don't ever want patients to think it's their fault they got cancer. At the same time, we want them to live as healthy and supportive of
Exactly.
lifestyle as possible.
But I think if you can help them see that there are positives, it's not the end of the world,
Yes.
and give them something to focus on and move forwards, that can really, really help.
Yes,
When
absolutely.
patients are stuck in that downward spiral, it's the end of the world, oh my God, my life is over, they never claw their way back out.
Do you know, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, especially with my first cancer, was from Chris Carr, who wrote Crazy Sexy Cancer, the clever book.
Yep.
She had an incurable, there wasn't even a treatment for her cancer.
Yeah.
So what she ended up doing was she wrote this advice. She said, it's okay to feel despair, and it's okay to wallow in that despair for
Yes.
3 days. But you may not wallow in despair longer than 3 days. Then you have to pony up and get out of it and move on. She said, but you're
Exactly.
allowed to have these wallows. And
Yes.
to me, reading that with such great permission was like, oh, good, I can wallow in it, because I was always fighting the wallows. But once I read that, I said, okay, well, I'll have a wallow. But the wallow would last a day because I had 3 days to wallow,
no,
and
it's
then
brilliant.
I need to use the whole 3 days.
Wait, do they have to be consecutive? Can you save them up?
That's a great idea.
My wallow week.
I have
My
one.
mum is my mum will often tell me, right, it's time to pull your backside out the sling and move on. You've been sad enough, and think, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's hard to hear that from other people, though. I think you have to do that on your own. You do that. You have to feel it. You have to feel like, okay, now I'm ready.
Yeah.
And that's a place of your own.
I have one last question. Cancer has obviously changed your life trajectory. You're not going back to being a breast surgeon anymore.
No, I've had to retire.
What's next? What do you think might be next?
It's crazy. So I had 6 months of treatment for my recurrence, and I was on sick leave. And I swear I was working 10 days a week on sick leave compared to the 3 days part-time before. I am so busy. And part of it's working out what I want to focus on for me. And part of it's how much time do I give to helping other people with their projects. And that's a really fine balance I'm learning. I am passionate about exercise in cancer, and I'm launching a charity called Cancer Fit to encourage everybody to get active. I'm doing 1 day a week working at a local hospital reviewing deaths, looking for good and bad care. So I'm still a doctor, but I'm protected from seeing patients. I'm also an ambassador for a movement called Working with Cancer to help people with cancer get back to work. But what I have done, I've blocked Fridays off. I don't look at emails, I don't cook, I don't clean, I don't do anything for anybody else. That's my indulgent day. And that's made a huge difference to just recentering me. When
What do you do?
wants to, sorry?
What do you do on Fridays?
I garden, I cycle, I may binge watch something on Netflix. It doesn't matter, but it's my guilt-free day. Because so many people want things from me. I must get 10 emails a week. Could you talk? Could you write? Could you do this?
Yeah.
And it's so hard to say no. But I read a brilliant book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? By one of the GB Olympic rowers and a life coach. And for 4 years, his plan was basically, if I have cake, will it make the boat go faster in the Olympics? And when you're trying to work out what you want to do, it's like, if I help other people and write stuff for them, is that taking away from me writing my book? And it's okay to say no because it's not helping my goals. And I think it's a whole new world of, but it's exciting.
Wow, that's great. It's great to hear that. I always love to hear, first of all, about gardening, and I love to hear about people binging on Netflix, because I certainly enjoy that too. So yeah, no, I relate to everything you say. You know, that you have a full-time career, and then suddenly the axe comes down, and you're suddenly an invalid. To go from that professional role to a sick role is like, what? But eventually there's some kind of peace and acceptance and an integration of, okay, I can be in a sick role, but because of social media, I'm able to also reach out and continue to work. So here I am on treatments, hyperbaric oxygen treatments that I'm getting, and I still have for another month. And I still have a full day, like 2 or 3 hours in the chamber. And the rest of the day, I'm still doing stuff, because even though you're just sitting around at the Cancer Lodge, there's tons of writing projects and things going on. So there is a whole other career to have. While an invalid, if you choose to embark in things like patient advocacy, which is what I've done. So.
And I think I'm actually helping far more people as a cancer patient than I was as a surgeon.
Isn't that an interesting person? Yeah, I think you're right. And that's kind of another interesting aspect of the social media world we live in.
Yeah, it's through the book and through talking, I get emails from people all over the world. So I wrote an article about sex after breast cancer in a local paper in the UK. And my mum found out about it from her neighbour's daughter who saw it in New Zealand online. I love social media. Things just spread, and yeah, it's great.
I've met the best people on social media.
I can imagine that was one of your more popular.
Yes, I had women in tears saying, "Thank you, I'm not alone."
Well, yes, and whenever we published or worked on that topic, we have this massive influx of people saying, "For God's sake, thank you for, because I got no guidance about this on my treatment."
No one talks about it.
No one talks about it, and that if for many people, it's a huge quality of life dimension, and especially with breast cancer, people are looking for guidance around, can I use this product? Does it have estrogen in it?
Exactly.
I don't know. So there's lots, and that's where it's a huge. You can't. There's no overestimating the value of that.
No, and it's why we put a chapter in the book, and I was the one who had to read that out for the audiobook. I had to apologize because I said, I'm going to use the word Viagra and dilators and dildos, and my mum's going to hear this. Okay, just be a doctor.
I had the identical experience with that, and people would phone me and say, what the hell is a dilator? And then I said, I didn't know either. I had to learn that. And so this is how, and if you, in my world of colorectal, if you don't use that dilator in the little window of opportunity you have, you will be ruined for life.
Exactly.
And so it's like, you must get on this, you must. And because of our advocacy, now we have sex education, essentially. It's a mandatory part of anybody who's going to go through pelvic radiation for whatever reason. They have a class that they must attend, or they are welcome to attend. I suppose you could opt out, but it's there for everyone to learn about this. And those and sexual health nurses who have no trouble with the language sit down and teach. The same with when you look at men and prostate cancer, they get a lot of attention to their sexual health because they're men and men care about that. And if it were, so we women have to step up and take over and say we want just as much attention to our needs as men get for theirs.
Definitely.
And the web is a great way to distribute education. It is, I think, in a generation, in less than a generation, in the last 5 years, it's changed things enormously. In the next 5, it's going to change them even more. And I would hope that everybody who gets a cancer diagnosis gets online, frankly. You have to have a little bit of adult judgment, but good morning, welcome to the world. Get online, connect with people, find groups, get information. When I was first diagnosed, this was not available. And I can't say how valuable these social connections are.
Well, they're huge. They really are life-changing for the better.
I just want to, before we end today, I just want to say how much I appreciated your book, Liz, because what I found about it was how incredibly readable it was, and how
Yeah.
much, how I really, really benefited from the careful level of explanation of the genetics, Herder, BRCA, all those other things, which, I'm familiar with, but I had never seen written up in such a careful way to explain it to the average person,
Thank
and the
you.
reading level of about, grade 10, which I thought was just perfect, because for many of us, and for many women, I'm imagining too, who are new to the diagnosis, they're so overwhelmed they can barely process it,
Yeah.
the science of it, that I
You
thought
don't
was
understand.
very, very carefully written that way. And I really, really benefited and enjoyed, even though I have a lot of knowledge myself about those things, from a science point of view, I just thought that your delivery was just pitch perfect. And I've
Thank
loved
you.
your TED Talks. I've loved everything that you put out. I just
Oh.
think what you've done is really, really, I think for so many, it's so much more credible. It's credible coming from a doctor, and it's really
Yeah.
credible coming from a surgeon. In my world, that's surgeons are a whole other level. And,
Well, we are far more important than doctors. I think I'm
Okay, my world's a little different, but we're not going to discuss that right now.
no,
yeah,
I'm right.
that's another story.
I think because I've been on both sides,
For-
people will listen to me from both sides. So doctors and nurses will listen to what I say and respect what I want to say. But I found it really hard writing. And I think through blogging and realizing the public were interacting with me, I learned to write for the public. And I learned how to tailor the science of breast cancer down to patients, because I have to explain that to them in the job. And there's no point being all scientific when they won't understand it. But we just wrote the book we needed when we were diagnosed. So between Trish is an academic GP, she's a professor of evidence-based medicine, and I'm an expert. I have 2 degrees in breast cancer. Between us, we bought 20 books, because doctors tell you what will happen, but it's patients who tell you how to cope. And we just wrote the book we wished we'd had.
Perfect.
David
Yeah, it's
Shriver said that too, and his book is one of those seminal books, I think, in
Oh,
terms
it's brilliant.
and it is an insight into cancer. And I think yours is right up there with his.
We
Oh,
had a
thank you.
previous author too, who was a breast cancer survivor and also a pediatrician, and described the doctor's side of it as well. But and so that was one of our, I guess, our first interviews, Pat, wasn't it, years ago? Sort of on both sides of the stethoscope, I think was the title of her book.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
and
Yeah. Liz, thank you. Thank you so much for
You're
taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. It is a pleasure to meet you. And we'll be watching for your next TED Talk.
fantastic. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Robin.